everyone, welcome back to my channel. Most of you have probably seen the latest news coming out from the US about the Supreme Court ruling on abortion, which is infuriating, to say the least. As an archaeologist who's studied the past quite extensively, watching things actually go back in time is incredibly surreal. I'm really lucky that I am a Canadian citizen living in the UK, both of which are places where abortion is legal and provided as a part of our national health services. But as YouTube analytics tells me, a very large portion of my audience comes from the US. I wanted to make today's video as a show of support for those of you living in the US who now have to fight for women's rights to be equal or greater than those of corpses and guns. I'm not going to be speculating or talking really in depth on this video about the religious and philosophical views on the morality and ethics of abortion. Instead, what I want to present today is more of an overview of the history of abortion, how we've been practicing it. I want to come at this a bit more from a health and safety perspective. All right, let's dig in. I'm going to start out with some health and safety facts. This relates to archaeology because health and safety has become incredibly important on archaeological sites. This is largely due to our incorporation with the construction sector, and it's incredibly important to people within the construction sector to promote the safety of their workers, and I think that's something that's really relevant to talk about when it comes to abortion. Approximately 205 million pregnancies occur each year worldwide, and about a third of those pregnancies are unintended. Around 56 million abortions are performed each year, again worldwide, but about 45% of that 56 million are performed unsafely and subsequently are a major cause of injury and death amongst women. The World Health Organization describes unsafe abortions as those being performed by unskilled individuals with hazardous equipment in unsanitary conditions. A major factor of whether or not an abortion is safe is whether or not it is legal in the place you are performing it. Legal abortions performed in the developing world are amongst the safest procedures in medicine. As of 2012 in the United States, abortion was estimated to be about 14 times safer than giving birth. From 2000 to 2009 in the US, abortion had a lower mortality rate than running a marathon. A long-term study amongst US women found that 99% of them that they still thought that they had made the right decision within 5 years of having their abortion. The primary emotion that they felt was relief. The negative social stigma of their communities around abortion was the main factor as to why some women would start to feel guilt and sadness years after they have an abortion. Okay, so now that we've done kind of the health and safety side of things, we're going to move on to our history lesson. So in case you didn't know, abortion has been around for thousands of years, and we have plenty of evidence of abortion being practiced in a variety of ancient civilizations, including China, India, Greece, Rome, Egypt, basically everywhere. Most of the early abortion techniques that were used up until very recently in human history were pharmacological and non-surgical. This means either taking some kind of like herbal concoction or drink, or practicing a physical technique like running, jumping, massaging, and binding your abdomen, strenuous manual labor, weightlifting, or diving. Other methods as well could include things like fasting, bloodletting, pouring hot water onto your abdomen, or lying on a heated coconut shell. The first recorded evidence that we have of methods for inducing an abortion comes from the Eborus papyri from ancient Egypt, which dates to around 1500 BCE. So that's 3,500 years ago. It was a medical papyrus of herbal knowledge that describes a method for a woman to have an abortion in the first, second, or third trimester. An 8th century Indian Sanskrit text instructs women wanting to induce an abortion to sit either over steaming water or a pot of stewed onions. In Imperial China, abortion did not constitute a criminal offense and was practiced as the life of a fetus was considered inferior to that of a human being. Abortifacient knowledge, or how to induce an abortion, is credited as being given to the Chinese people by the mythical ruler Shennong. In Japan, we see documents talking about abortion as early as 12th century. In the later Edo period, we actually see an increase in the amount of abortions that were happening in Japan because the high taxes and famine was hitting the poorest class the hardest, and they couldn't afford to have any more children. In modern day Japan is known worldwide for its acceptance of abortion practices. When we go to ancient Greece, it's generally considered that they did not consider abortion to be illegal. Fertility was valued, especially when it came to producing a male heir or male child, but having a large family was not always considered ideal. Famous philosophers like Plato and Aristotle wrote that the state should neither be too big or too small. Aristotle saw early term abortions as a way to control population size. Soranus, a 2nd century Greek physician, described several abortion methods in his texts, including one where a woman would jump and hit her bum with her heels, which was called the Lacedaemonian leap. When we look at Rome, abortion was pretty commonly practiced during time periods like the Roman Republic, and this is partially due to the influence of Stoicism philosophy, which did not view the fetus as a human being. It was, however, outlawed by the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, Constantine, in the 4th century AD. Physicians in the Islamic world during the medieval period documented several different methods of abortion, including mentioning their effectiveness and prevalence. The Quran does not directly address or speak about intentional abortion. That basically means that it's left at the discretion of the countries and clerics who are interpreting it. There are obviously a variety of different opinions amongst Islamic scholars as to whether or not you can terminate a pregnancy, but there are no explicit prohibitions against it under Islamic law. In Christianity and the Catholic Church in particular, abortion has been viewed as a sin as early as the 1st century AD. While they viewed it as a sin and technically you weren't supposed to do it, they really didn't start vigorously opposing abortion until the 19th century, so the 1800s. Prior to this, most Catholics did not refer to the termination of a pregnancy prior to the quickening as an abortion. And quickening is a term that is associated with the first time that you feel a baby move. So basically to them, if you had an abortion before that, it was okay and it wasn't considered an abortion, whereas afterwards, not so acceptable. In Judaism, abortion has been considered more from a social perspective rather than a theological one, but within that, the health of the woman has always been seen as the greatest priority. When we get to places like colonial America, abortion was very widespread in the early days, but it was much more underground because of really strict laws about having sex between unmarried people. Founding father Benjamin Franklin wrote a book in the 1700s that was primarily for tutoring people on mathematics. But within that, as a part of the book, he included the careful measurements of a recipe for an aborifacient drink, and which meant that they could then take that away and actually use that if they wanted to. In her book, published in 1705, the famous naturalist Maria Sibylla Merian recorded how Indian and African slave populations in a South American Dutch colony called Suriname, which is still a country today, used the seeds of a particular plant as an aborifacient to prevent themselves from getting pregnant and giving birth to children that would then also become slaves. Up until the 1800s, abortion had been widely practiced and considered legal under common law up until a quickening, so probably like your first 3 to 5 months of pregnancy. But in the 1800s, social attitudes shifted and the English-speaking world started implementing a bunch of laws outlawing abortion. This shift was influenced by a variety of factors, but one that I think is really interesting is that it was partially a backlash to the emergence of women's rights movement. In the US in particular, physicians were actually at the forefront of the push for the criminalizing of abortion. And there were several reasons for this, but one that I think is really important to talk about today is that at this time, they were trying to standardize the medical profession. At this time, the people usually administering abortions were people like midwives, not formal doctors, and because of this, they got a bit of a stigma as being a nuisance in regards to public health. Additionally, they would have been competition for the doctors, and a much cheaper competition than a doctor because they don't have that formal training and they're not part of a medical society. So they were disliked by the more formalized medical profession. The physicians' campaign against abortion began in the early 1800s, and we start to see statutes against abortion appearing in the US around the 1820s. Criminalization of abortion started to accelerate from the 1860s, and by 1910, every single state in the US had anti-abortion law. However, they weren't exactly very well enforced. In a direct contrast to this, France, during the same time period of the 19th century, abortion was viewed as a last resort for an unwed woman who had become pregnant. However, in the 1800s, writers began to write about abortion as a means of family planning for married women, as well as being more of a logical solution to unwanted pregnancies that are the result of ineffective contraceptives. This shift in attitudes was driven by the fact that both medical and non-medical practitioners of abortion agreed that it was generally quite safe. The Soviet Union, under Vladimir Lenin in the 1920s, were the first government to legalize abortion and make it available on request, often for no cost. In 1973, the US Supreme Court made a landmark ruling on the case known as Roe v. Wade, which essentially stated that a Texas law that was saying that abortion, except in the case of saving a mother's life, was unconstitutional. The immediate result of this was that any state laws that were contrary to this ruling were then considered null, and abortion became legal across the entire country. On June 24th, 2022, the Supreme Court did a U-turn on this decision in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This means now, instead of being something that is mandated at a federal level, states have the power to decide on whether or not abortions are legal and also what kind of restrictions they want to place on abortions. It's estimated about half of the states are likely to introduce anti-abortion laws if they don't have them already. Something that I noticed in the ruling that I think is also really important to note here is that this ruling is going to have much farther reaching consequences than abortion, as the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas noted in his opinion that he gave on the ruling that it sets a precedent for them to re-examine other historic Supreme Court rulings like those on contraception and gay marriage. What? So that brings us up to present day. And the key point that I wanted to make with this video is that really, at the end of the day, abortion and legal access to safe abortions is a health and safety issue. Regardless of whether they are legal or not, unsafe or not, abortions happen, and no amount of laws is going to completely eradicate them. Women who need one are going to find a way, and as a government looking after your people, it should be your responsibility to make sure that they have free and safe access to do so. Removing safe and legal access to abortions is effectively going against everything everyone ever gets taught about health and safety by imposing a huge risk on any woman who will seek an illegal or unsafe abortion in the US. This is also something that is really going to disproportionately negatively affect working class and poor communities, especially communities of color. In my view, and I think in the view of the vast majority of people, including the vast majority of people in the US, to become a parent is an absolute gift. But it is something that comes with a huge amount of responsibility, and it is something that irrevocably changes your body and your life. So women should have a right to choose when they want that to happen. And they should not be forced to have children before they are ready to do so because they can't afford to go out of state, because it's illegal, or because they don't want to potentially die getting a back alley procedure. I've done my best to contribute by talking about this topic on my channel because, you know, I can't really go out and march because I live in the UK and it's not really an issue about being denied here. But I really just wanted to show my support for everyone today and to be really clear that this is not something that people should be taking lying down, or considering that this ruling is just like restoring of what it's been like since time immemorial. People have been getting abortions for as long as they have been pregnant, and outlawing them is not going to have any positive benefits for anyone, including the babies that get born. There's going to be links in the description box below to more resources where you can educate yourself on the history of abortion,